The honk was sharp, enough to cut through the morning traffic, like a blade through silk. Marcus Chen gripped the steering wheel of his 2004 Honda Civic, his knuckles turning white as another angry gesture flashed past his window. He could see her in the rearview mirror, a woman in designer sunglasses, her face twisted with indignation, one manicured hand jutting out of the window of her luxury SUV as if she were conducting an orchestra of fury. His 8-year-old daughter, Emma, sat in the back seat with her small fingers wrapped around her backpack straps, her eyes wide and uncertain. "Daddy, what did we do wrong?" she whispered. And Marcus felt that familiar weight settle into his chest, the one that came with every unexpected bill, every concerned look from Emma's teacher, every moment when the world seemed determined to remind him that he was barely holding it together. Marcus had been driving for the rideshare company for 2 years, ever since his wife passed away from cancer. 2 years of 5-star ratings, of taking safe routes, of never causing accidents. 2 years of making sure Emma never saw him cry, never knew how scared he was about paying rent next month. But one moment of distraction, checking the navigation app to ensure he wasn't late picking up Emma from school before his shift officially ended, and now this woman was making a scene at a red light in downtown Seattle, with at least a dozen other vehicles as witnesses to her rage. The CEO of Radiance Enterprises was having what could only be described as the worst morning of her professional life. Victoria Hammond had spent the last hour in an emergency board meeting, where shareholders had questioned her leadership, her vision, her entire strategic direction for the company. They'd questioned whether a woman her age was still hungry enough, still sharp enough. The comment about age had stung deeper than she'd like to admit. She'd gotten into her car intending to drive to a lunch meeting that would prove them all wrong, prove that she was still a force to be reckoned with. But then this Civic had cut her off, or had she cut it off? Honestly, the details were already blurring. All she knew was that her frustration needed somewhere to go, and this driver had just made himself the unfortunate recipient. When the light turned green, Victoria accelerated around the Civic, pulled directly in front of it, and slammed on the brakes. Not enough to cause a serious collision, but enough to make a point, enough to make him feel it. She watched in her mirror as the driver's face registered shock, saw him grip his steering wheel. She saw a small child in the back seat, somewhere in the recesses of her mind, the part of her that wasn't angry and frightened. About her job, a small voice whispered, something about proportion, about who she was becoming. But she ignored it. She pulled down to the intersection, rolled down her window, and when traffic stalled again, she let loose. "You absolute moron! Do you have any idea how to drive? You're going to kill someone, probably that little girl behind you." Her voice was loud enough to turn heads on the sidewalk. Pedestrians stopped walking. Other drivers stared. She was aware of the audience, and some ugly part of her fed on it. She was powerful here. She was in control. Marcus felt the words like physical blows. He glanced at Emma in the rearview mirror and saw her eyes filling with tears. His protective instinct flared, and for a moment, he considered responding in kind, matching her rage with his own. God knew he had enough stored up inside him, a reservoir of frustration, about losing his wife, about money never stretching far enough, about the state of the world his daughter was growing up in. But then Emma whispered, "Daddy!" And he made a choice. He took a deep breath. He unbuckled his seatbelt, and instead of yelling back, he stepped out of his car. Victoria fell silent, surprised by the movement. She expected confrontation, the kind of ugliness that would probably make her feel worse but also somehow vindicate her anger. Instead, she watched this man, thin, tired-looking, with grease stains on his work shirt, walk toward her car with his hands open and visible, not threatening, actually almost gentle. "Ma'am," he said, leaning toward her window. His voice was steady, almost calm. "I'm sorry if I cut you off. That was wrong of me. I'm checking on my daughter, and I wasn't paying full attention to the road. You're absolutely right to be upset." Victoria blinked. This wasn't the script she'd written. "I see you're having a really hard day," Marcus continued, and there was something in his voice that made her realize he actually meant it. He wasn't being sarcastic or passive-aggressive. He genuinely saw her. "I know what hard days feel like. I've had about 700 of them in the past 2 years. But I imagine your hard might be a different kind. You look like someone carrying something heavy, if you don't mind my saying so." Something in Victoria's chest cracked. She felt tears prickling the corners of her eyes, and she absolutely hated it. She hated that this stranger had managed to reach something in her that the board of directors couldn't touch, that her ex-husband's betrayal 3 years ago hadn't managed to access. "I shouldn't have yelled at you," she heard herself say. The words felt foreign in her mouth. "Doesn't matter," Marcus said. "We all have moments. I forgive you. More importantly, I hope you forgive yourself. Whatever's going on, screaming at a stranger in traffic isn't going to fix it. Trust me, I've been tempted plenty of times." Emma appeared at her window then, looking hesitantly at Victoria. The child held out a crumpled drawing, a stick figure family with hearts around them. "My daddy says everybody's sad sometimes," Emma said in the small voice of children everywhere. "And my teacher says we should be kind to sad people. Are you sad?" Victoria couldn't answer. She was too busy crying. And she was aware of how absurd this was, a CEO in a $1,000 suit, crying in the middle of traffic because of a children's drawing. But she took the paper with trembling hands, and she looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and asked him his story. They talked for 20 minutes, traffic flowing around them both, Emma sketching with colored pencils in Marcus's back seat while he and Victoria stood by her car. He told her about his wife, about the struggles of a single parent, about the dignity he tried to maintain despite circumstances that seemed designed to strip it away. She told him about the board meeting, about the constant pressure to prove herself, about the deep-seated fear that everyone saw her as past her prime. "You know what I see?" Marcus said. "I see someone who needs to remember why you fell in. Love with your job in the first place, not the corporate thing. The actual work. The part that matters." By the time Marcus left to pick up Emma from school, Victoria had his number in her phone. She texted that evening with a job offer, not to be grateful. She was careful to explain. Not as charity, but because she sensed in him the kind of integrity and empathy that Radiance Enterprises desperately needed in its leadership. He could manage the community outreach division, work with non-profits, probably part-time so he could still prioritize his daughter's needs. The board of directors was skeptical at first, but Victoria brought him into that next meeting. She had Marcus tell the story, not of the yelling, but of the choice he'd made in the aftermath. When she announced a new direction for the company, one that prioritized community initiatives and employee well-being, several board members suddenly understood. Victoria wasn't losing her edge. She was sharpening it in a different direction. 6 months later, Marcus was managing community programs that had already touched the lives of hundreds of families facing hardship. Victoria had restructured her entire C-suite with an emphasis on people who understood struggle, who brought empathy to the table. The company's stock price climbed, but more importantly, so did its purpose. Emma and Victoria became friends of a different sort. Every month, Emma would draw something new, and Victoria would frame it in her office. When asked about the stick figures and hearts covering her corporate walls, she'd simply say, "That's my reminder of who I want to be." One afternoon, Emma asked Victoria why she'd screamed in traffic that day, and Victoria, who had become considerably more honest in the months since, knelt down to the child's eye level and said, "I was scared, sweetheart. I was scared, and I thought being mean would make me feel stronger. But your daddy taught me that real strength is kindness. Real power is admitting when you're wrong." Emma nodded seriously, as if this confirmed something she'd always suspected about the world. Then she hugged Victoria, and Victoria held on to that small, warm body and understood, finally, what the shareholders had gotten wrong. She wasn't losing her hunger. She was finally, after all these years, understanding what she'd actually been hungry for all along. Not success, but meaning. Not power over people, but the power to genuinely help them. In the traffic that day, when a single dad chose grace instead of anger, and when a powerful woman chose humility instead of superiority, something shifted. Not just for them, but for everyone they touched afterward. Emma's drawing eventually hung not just in Victoria's office, but in the Radiance Enterprises headquarters, a constant reminder that the most important meetings happen not in boardrooms, but on ordinary streets, where strangers decide whether to add pain to the world or subtract it. And Marcus? He learned that sometimes the universe is watching. Sometimes kindness finds its way home. And sometimes the most successful career move you can make is simply being the best version of yourself. Because you never know who's paying attention.